It's late at night. You and your friends are at a sleepover, hopped up on sugar and caffeine, having the time of your lives. One of your friends comes up with the brilliant idea to sneak out of the house and take a walk to the town reservoir just down the street. You're a little bit nervous about getting caught, but in the end, you decide to go anyway. The next thing you know, you and your friends are standing on the bank of the reservoir, looking out into the darkness. It's eerily quiet. Everything is still. And then suddenly, something begins to stir just below the surface. Your heart starts to pound, but all you can do is watch as a mysterious creature 20 feet long rises up from the depths. His gigantic mouth is hung open, and its armor-like scales glisten in the moonlight. The creature lets out a low, rumbling cry, and then slowly sinks back down beneath the waves. Only then are you able to speak its name, a creature so rare that most go their entire lives without seeing it. Gyarados. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 in our series that examines what it would be like if Pokemon existed in our world. In today's episode, we're covering a fan favorite. Since Generation 1, Gyarados has been one of the more popular Pokemon on the roster, and in my humble opinion, one of the coolest. I have fond memories of playing the games when I was young, stopping to fish at just about any location the game would let me, and praying that a Gyarados would suddenly appear. Most of the time, though, it was just stupid magikarp. But if Gyarados were real, I don't think that people would be nearly as excited to find one of these in the wild. In fact, I think they would be terrified, for reasons we'll discuss later on in the video. For now, let's kick things off by asking a simple question. Where in our world would Gyarados live? In doing research for this video, one of the things I found most interesting comes from the Pokédex entries for Magikarp and Gyarados. In Pokemon Yellow, data for Magikarp reads, "Famous for being very unreliable. It can be found swimming in seas, lakes, rivers, and shallow puddles." Similarly, Pokemon Sun states that although Magikarp is weak and helpless, it is also incredibly fertile. It exists in such multitudes that you'll soon grow tired of seeing them. However, when it comes to Gyarados, Magikarp's evolved form, things are a bit different, with the original red and blue versions of the game describing the Pokemon as being, quote, rarely seen in the wild. So Magikarp are extremely common and can be found in almost any body of water, but Gyarados are extremely rare. The question that we have to ask then is why? If there are Magikarp everywhere, shouldn't there be Gyarados everywhere too? Well, not quite. Here's the best explanation I could come up with. I think the vast majority of Magikarp, probably 98% or more, never evolve into Gyarados. There's a number of factors that I think play into this, but I think the main one is the simple fact that Magikarp is an incredibly weak Pokemon. The games make this abundantly clear, believe me. Because it's so weak, most Magikarp just never gain enough strength to evolve. They just live out their entire lives as Magikarp. In Pokemon Pearl, the Pokédex entry for Magikarp reads, "It is unable to swim against even slow-moving currents. It always splashes about for some reason." Similarly, the entry in Soul Silver says that, quote, "For no reason, it jumps and splashes about." Personally, I don't think that all of this jumping and splashing is for no reason. As a matter of fact, I think Magikarp has a very good reason for doing this. It's really the only thing it can do in order to grow stronger and have a chance to evolve. It's kinda sad when you really think about it. A Pokemon that wants so badly to evolve into this bigger, stronger version of itself, but most of the time, unfortunately, falls short of that goal. Still though, there are a select few Magikarp who do go on to evolve because they are a bit stronger. This could be due to living in a lake or river with current and having to put more effort into swimming every day, or it could just be a matter of genetics. Maybe a small portion of Magikarp are just born stronger. But here's the kicker. I don't think that strength is the only factor that determines whether or not Magikarp will evolve into Gyarados. I think there's another factor here that we need to consider before we finally circle back and answer the question of where in our world Gyarados would call home. I call it the stress factor. In Season 1, Episode 16 of the Pokemon anime, titled Pokemon Shipwreck, we see James from Team Rocket lash out at Magikarp while stranded at sea. In a fit of frustration, James kicks the Magikarp into the water. The Pokemon flails in the water, obviously distraught and going through a significant amount of stress. Then, out of nowhere, the Magikarp evolves into Gyarados. Based on what we saw in this episode, I think we can conclude that if a Magikarp is unable to grow strong enough to evolve, in some scenarios, it can actually become stressed enough to evolve. This has major implications for how Magikarp and Gyarados would impact our world, but again, we'll get to that later. Okay, back to the original question. Where would Gyarados live? Because Magikarp primarily relies on growing stronger to evolve, I think Gyarados would mostly be found in deep river systems around the world with strong currents, as well as lakes that these rivers flow into. One river that immediately comes to mind is the Congo in West Central Africa, which is the world's deepest river at depths of over 720 feet. The Congo is home to several large species of fish that I think Gyarados would probably feed on, including several types of catfish, Nile perch, and the Goliath tigerfish. Another potential Gyarados habitat that comes to mind, and I hope I'm saying this right, is the Yangtze River, which flows for nearly 4,000 miles from the Tibetan Plateau all the way to the South China Sea. And by the way, let me just take the opportunity to quickly say that I think Gyarados would be able to survive in both fresh and salt water, meaning that it would likely be found throughout the Yangtze River, as well as parts of the South China Sea near to where the river opens up. I know this because of the Pokemon Yellow version Pokedex entry we read earlier for Magikarp, which states that Magikarp lives in puddles, rivers, lakes, and yes, seas. If Magikarp's biological makeup allows it to survive in the sea, then I'm assuming Gyarados can as well. In addition to large river systems, I also think that Gyarados would sometimes, though not very often, be found in smaller lakes, reservoirs, and even ponds that are frequented by fishermen. The constant stress and pressure that local Magikarp would be under from being caught, sometimes over and over again, by fishermen would undoubtedly cause some of them to evolve. Of course, a 20-foot-long Gyarados would probably have a tough time surviving in a shallow pond, and would more than likely destroy the entire pond's ecosystem before finally running out of food and passing away. But for lakes and reservoirs that are just a little bit bigger, with more space and more sources of food, I think that Gyarados would be able to live full, healthy lives. Yeah, that's right. If Pokemon were real, your local lake or pond could be home to Gyarados. But how would Gyarados live? Well, for one thing, I think it would be extremely territorial, and males would probably fight over females on a regular basis. According to Pokemon Omega Ruby, Gyarados actually has violent tendencies wired into their brains, meaning it's just a part of who they are as a species. The Pokedex entry reads, "When Magikarp evolves into Gyarados, its brain cells undergo a structural transformation. It is said that this transformation is to blame for this Pokemon's wildly violent nature." I don't think it's a stretch to say that all of this violence and aggression from Gyarados would likely have a devastating impact on the ecosystem of a given lake or river system. Remember, these are Pokemon we're talking about, not just regular animals. They fight using incredibly powerful moves, like Dragon Rage and Hyper Beam, which would inadvertently shatter the habitats of other animals living in the area, like fish and birds nesting in the area. And yet, that's not even the worst of it. If Gyarados existed in our world, it would be a consistent threat to cities, towns, and neighborhoods in the surrounding areas. To put it bluntly, Gyarados would be 21 feet and 518 pounds of pure chaos. Just listen to some of these Pokedex entries from various games in the franchise. Brutally vicious and enormously destructive, known for totally destroying cities in ancient times. Once it appears, it goes on a rampage. It remains enraged until it demolishes everything around it. It fires hyper beams in all directions, burning the surrounding area to ash. There are some regions where it's called the Deity of Destruction. Yeah, this thing would be problematic, to say the least. Obviously, human beings would have enough sense to recognize this threat, and I think there would be a number of countermeasures put in place to protect both wildlife and ourselves from the wrath of Gyarados. Number 1, I think there would be strict no fishing rules in ponds or lakes containing magikarp. And I'm not just talking about a sign posted here and there either. I'm talking high-level security from park rangers, police, or potentially even the military in some cases. I realize that may sound a little extreme, but think about it. If one of these magikarp gets caught by a fisherman or harassed in some other way, it could create enough stress in the creature to force it to evolve into Gyarados. And once a Gyarados is in those waters, destruction will inevitably follow, and human lives could be at risk. I also think that fishermen would be widely encouraged, and possibly even compelled by law, to dispatch Magikarp immediately in the event that they do catch one accidentally. It may sound a bit ruthless, but believe it or not, this is actually a practice that is relatively common in the United States, and I'm assuming in other parts of the world as well. The snakehead fish, for example, is an invasive species that was first discovered in the US back in 2002. Due to its overly aggressive nature and its ability to adapt and live in a variety of different types of waterways, the snakehead poses a real threat to local ecosystems and wildlife. As such, the official USGS government website outlines steps that you should take if you ever happen to catch a snakehead, including killing the fish by freezing it on ice and then contacting the US Fish and Wildlife Service to file a report. Magikarp would probably have a government page of its own. The page might read, "If you capture a Magikarp, do not release the fish or throw it on the bank, as it will likely be able to jump back into the water. Instead, the USGS asks that you dispatch the fish as quickly as possible, as prolonged stress could lead to the Magikarp evolving into Gyarados. Once Magikarp is dispatched, please contact the US Fish and Wildlife Service as soon as possible." But for a Pokemon as destructive as Gyarados, I don't think it would be enough to simply patrol local waterways and ask fishermen for their compliance. For significant threats like this, I think there would definitely be some kind of government agency established to combat the Pokemon, or at least try to control them somehow so that they no longer threaten human lives or the ecosystems they're part of. We'll call it the Pokemon Control and Management Agency, or the PCMA for short. Tasked with keeping the public safe from out-of-control Pokemon, the PCMA would have Gyarados as one of its key focus areas, responding to calls of sightings and showing up on scene ready for action. If possible, the PCMA would focus its efforts on calming and potentially relocating the out-of-control Pokemon to a new area, away from the public. Killing it would be a last resort. Think about it. If Pokemon were real, maybe there would be man-made lakes in the middle of nowhere where the PCMA would transfer wild Gyarados to so that they can continue to live without disrupting humanity. Granted, I think you'd need a lot of sedatives in order to put a Gyarados to sleep long enough to safely transport it, but you get the idea. The PCMA would have the solution. So folks, I feel like we've painted a pretty good picture of what it would be like if Gyarados existed in our world. We've established that Magikarp would essentially be a fisherman's worst nightmare, and that Gyarados' aggression would devastate local towns and ecosystems. Now let's recap by taking a look into the lives of two separate Gyarados living in different parts of the world. 10-year-old Sam, who just evolved 2 days ago and lives in Central Park Lake, New York City, and a much older Gyarados named Clyde, who spent the past 40 years of his life swimming the Congo River. We'll start with Sam, who's been stirring up quite the buzz lately on news stations across the country. A wild Gyarados popping up in the heart of Manhattan is completely unheard of, and yet somehow, it happened. The Pokemon Control and Management Agency, or PCMA, was quick to look into the matter and believes that someone illegally released a pet Magikarp into the Central Park Lake, sparking an investigation into how this could have happened given the lake's tight security. Nevertheless, there's now been a full-grown Gyarados swimming in Central Park for the past 2 days, and no one really knows what to do about it. The New York City PCMA is well equipped to deal with other Pokemon that pop up across the city, like coughing and wheezing for example, but lack the experience and the resources needed to effectively handle a rogue Gyarados. It's just not a threat that they're used to. The city decides to increase security through Central Park in response to dozens of local Pokemon enthusiasts trying to sneak in to capture a photo of the creature. Images do end up getting leaked to the media though, thanks to someone who managed to snap a few pictures from a remotely piloted drone, thus adding to the buzz and making the story go viral on the internet. Worried that Sam will begin lashing out and bring chaos to the city, the PCMA knows that it has to act quickly. In the dead of night, as Sam sleeps somewhere beneath the lake's surface, the PCMA releases a non-lethal chemical into the water meant to sedate the Gyarados, with the goal being to peacefully transport it to Dragon Lake, a man-made body of water in upstate New York specifically created for Gyarados. But in the final hour, a local aquarium offers to take Sam into captivity so that the entire world can come visit this rare Pokemon. City officials warn that this is a bad idea, but in the end, the drive for profit and tourism wins the day, and the aquarium is approved to become Sam's new home. More on this later. Meanwhile, in the Congo River, 50-year-old Clyde is feeding up in preparation for the annual spawn. This will be his 35th year searching for a mate since reaching sexual maturity at 15 years of age, and now that he's getting older, he knows that he's going to need all the strength he can get. Lucky for him, strength has always been one of Clyde's key features. He spent the first 5 years of his life as a magikarp living in Lake Tumba, a large but shallow lake that empties into the Congo River. Though Lake Tumba is home to thousands of magikarp, Clyde was always one of the strongest, often jumping higher and swimming faster than the others, thanks to strong genetics. At 5 years old, Clyde the Magikarp ventured into the Congo River and evolved into Gyarados almost instantly upon settling into his new home. Clyde has never had much trouble fighting other males in search of a mate, but things are different now. He is no longer the strong bull that he once was, and this year's spawn could prove to be quite the challenge. To make matters worse, finding food in this part of the river isn't as easy as it used to be. There was a time many years ago when the river was full of life, but since then, entire populations of catfish, pike, and other species of fish have been almost entirely wiped out after years of hyper beams and fighting from aggressive Gyarados. In this way, the Gyarados truly are their worst enemy. However, while Clyde may lack strength in his old age, he has wisdom on his side. He knows what parts of the river still have intact ecosystems, and it's here where he'll be able to find food, a huge advantage he has over some of the younger Gyarados who have less experience. Clyde travels down to the port of Mosaka, a small community known for its large fish population. Here, Clyde gorges himself on one of his favorite snacks, the Goliath tigerfish. Back in Manhattan, an unconscious Sam floats to the surface of Central Park Lake. The PCMA cautiously moves in on armored airboats, then use steel cables to bind the Pokemon and haul it back to shore. Sam is loaded into the back of a tractor-trailer and escorted by police officers out of the park. At the same time, new developments come out from Pokemon researchers and scientists about Sam's origins, with most believing that when Magikarp was dumped into the lake, the sudden environment change after years of captivity rapidly induced high levels of stress, causing the Magikarp to evolve into Gyarados almost instantly. Sadly, just days later, Sam appears to be once again heading back into captivity at the aquarium. For the next few months, Sam lives behind the thick glass walls of a 6 million gallon tank, looking out at tourists who came from near and far to see such a rare Pokemon in person. He's fed frozen fish a couple times a day, which does little to satisfy Sam's desire to hunt his own prey like he would be doing in the wild. And while his tank is large, it's also suffocating. About a week ago, Sam lashed out in anger and fired a hyper beam at a passing tiger shark, which killed the creature instantly, as well as dozens of other fish that were in the area at the time of the blast. Aquarium staff were taken back by the outburst, but unsurprisingly, did next to nothing to ensure it wouldn't happen again. The best, and sadly the most profitable option, was to simply look the other way. Sam was bringing in more money than ever for the aquarium, and nothing else really mattered. But just weeks later, the aquarium would come to regret that decision. It's unclear what, if anything, set him off, but out of nowhere, Sam begins firing a series of hyper beams again, this time targeting the glass wall that he's been staring through for weeks. Before the staff have a chance to respond, the tank shatters to pieces, and millions of gallons of water flood the hallways of the aquarium. But Sam doesn't stop there. He continues firing the hyper beams in every which direction, leveling entire sections of the aquarium and the buildings around it. Water floods the streets of Manhattan as people rush to safety. After nearly 7 full minutes of hyper beams, the military arrives on scene to try to subdue the Gyarados. However, the PCMA is now heavily involved as well, and is able to work with the military to bring Sam down using non-lethal force. With the situation finally under control, they decide to resort to the original plan, to transport Sam to Dragon Lake and let him live out the rest of his days as a truly free Gyarados. On the other side of the world, Clyde has spent the past few weeks feeding up in preparation for the spawn. He knows that he'll have to fight off other males in search of a mate, so the stronger he is, the better. Clyde makes his way north from his feeding grounds in Masaka towards Lake Tumba, where the female Gyarados will eventually go to lay their eggs. It's here, at this part of the Congo River, where war breaks out. When Clyde arrives, hyper beams are already blasting off in every which direction, creating an underwater light show like no other. Male Gyarados swarm the area like a pack of angry bees, charging this way and that, as the females stay deeper in the water column, out of harm's way. One of these females starts to show interest in Clyde fairly quickly, as she knows that his older age must mean he has strong genes and would make a good mate. However, the female's interest in Clyde also draws the attention of someone else, an aggressive young male we'll call Ozark, no more than 20 years old. Ozark charges at Clyde and clamps down on his tail with his powerful jaws. Clyde shakes him off and fires a hyper beam that narrowly misses Ozark's head. 2 or 3 years ago, he would have made that shot easily, but his aim has wavered in his old age. Ozark returns fire with a hyper beam of his own, hitting Clyde square in the chest and sending him spiraling into a nearby rock ledge. Ozark doesn't let up and begins firing hyper beams in rapid succession, effectively pinning Clyde to the ledge. He feels himself growing weaker with each hit, and though his armored scales can certainly take a beating, he knows that he can only take so much. Then, fueled by adrenaline, or maybe just a flame that lit somewhere deep inside, Clyde decides to fight back. He unleashes Hurricane, an attack so powerful that it creates an upward current and sends Ozark flying into the air above. Clyde dashes to the surface and follows up with a powerful hyper beam, connecting with Ozark as he comes crashing down into the river. The injured Gyarados quickly swims off, and the battle is won. Victorious, Clyde swims down into the depths and reunites with the interested female. Not long after, she will follow the canal into Lake Tumba, where she will lay her eggs, and a new generation of magikarp will be born. So folks, there you have it. A tale of 2 Gyarados, if you will. I think I've made my point clear that if Pokemon were real, Gyarados would absolutely be a force to be reckoned with. As a society, we would have to take drastic measures to protect our waterways, their ecosystems, and the people who live around them from this incredibly powerful and downright aggressive Pokemon. Honestly, it's probably a good thing that Gyarados doesn't exist in our world, but damn, it sure would be cool, wouldn't it? I hope that you enjoyed this video, and that you'll leave a like and consider subscribing to my channel. I'm new to YouTube and would love nothing more than to get this series off the ground, but I can't do it without your help. Also, please comment below and let me know what Pokemon you'd like me to cover in future videos. But that's all for now, folks. I want to thank you all so much for watching, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.